Today we're here to talk about should you euthanize your dog for aggression issues. I'm Matt Covey from Suburban Canine. We also have Mr. Nelson Madrano here.
How's it going, everybody?
Welcome to Balanced Dog Training. This is our podcast. If you're joining us again, thank you. We'd love to see you here. If you're new, thanks for coming and checking us out. If you are listening because of the topic today, I'm sorry to hear that if you're thinking about euthanizing your dog. But today we're going to walk you through exactly what we explain to a client. And we have these conversations a lot because we're called in for aggression issues all the time. So this is something we have a lot of experience in. And today we're going to kind of help guide you through the decision-making process on, do you keep training your dog? Do you try some things? Or is it time to kind of quote unquote call it quits?
Yeah, I think it's also, important just right off the top to kind of put out there, right, that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong situation. There is an appropriate time to euthanize your dog. There is an appropriate time to, again, quote unquote, call it quits. And that's a tough conversation that not a lot of people want to have. And some dog trainers, even that's why, we kind of thought this would be a really good episode, because it's tough to talk through this kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the big openings that we want to throw out there is that this is not about the dog. This is about protecting people. So as you're kind of wrestling with this decision, sometimes people say like, well, this sucks for the dog, or it's not fair, they didn't have a good chance in life, or, any of these things. And I understand why they say that. I understand why they think it, but it's not really relevant because this isn't about the dog. If you're thinking about euthanizing a dog for aggression issues, it's about protecting people. And, that's the reason. So don't get caught up in the dog's past and is this fair or not? Because at the end of the day, this sucks for the dog. There's no, way around that. You're not doing this because of their history and, fairness doesn't play into it. This is really about protecting people. So that's what you should be thinking about the entire time.
Yeah, and I think just the other side of that coin, right, is that this is about protecting people, not necessarily protecting dogs or other animals or anything like that. Like if your dog is very dog aggressive, it's pretty easy to keep them away from other dogs. But that is not the case with people, right? Which is why this, is a real option.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And at the end of the day, and some people might be opposed to this statement, and if you are, I think you're a crazy person. Human life is more important than animal life. It just is.
Oh, yeah.
And I love dogs, and I never say like, oh, I euthanize the dog in a cavalier manner. It's horrible, with people. I mean, this is a terrible thing to even be considering. But human life is infinitely more valuable than animal life. It just is.
Absolutely.
So, what we do is we kind of break this down into a variety of, just kind of some bullet points of things you should think about. And before we even get to that, I think one of the big ones is, I already mentioned, it's about protecting people. The breed of dog and size of dog matters here. And it just does. If you have a Pekingese that is vicious beyond belief, the odds of someone being killed or mauled are pretty slim. If you have a bull mastiff that goes after new people unprovoked and has pinned people to the ground and hurt them, well, obviously the odds of that dog mauling or killing someone are a lot higher. They've got the power to do it. So the whole, it seems like common sense, but sometimes it's not it doesn't go into people's equations, and it should. What type of dog is this? If the worst case scenario happens, then what is it? Is it that someone got bit and is bleeding, or is it that they are dead? That's a big distinction. So you need to think about size and type of dog for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about that in the past, right? Where the breed of dog that you get will absolutely affect other people's decision makings as far as like how they act around your dog. But that's also a real thing, right? Where the consequences are much higher on our end, but also people act different around those dogs, and sometimes that's enough to, spark some type of conflict. So when people are scared, they typically stiffen up, they start looking at the dog, and staring, all of that stuff. It's easier to get some of these breeds to react, and a lot of that is just it's a two-way street, just that the dogs are more reactive and aggressive, and that people act differently around them.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered an established breed and size matter here. They just do. So let's move on to, like, you're thinking about euthanizing your dog. So clearly it's done something, I would assume, right? And I've heard people say a bite's a bite, and that is stupid. That makes no sense to me. A bite is not a bite in the sense of they're all the same. That's just like, there's warning bites, there's nips, there's provoked bites, there's unprovoked bites, there's deadly bites, there's bites that crush a bone. I mean, a bite is not a bite. So I don't care if you say your dog's bit 3 people, 10 people, or 1 person. So far, that's not relevant to me in the euthanasia decision. It's what's happened. Anything you want to kind of speak to there, Nelson?
Yeah, I mean, like the most, I don't know, the most obvious one to me when I'm talking to people and I ask like, okay, well, tell me, like, tell me what the situation was. How did it all go down? Is did the dog go for your face, your neck? Did it jump up to bite you? And that is way different than did it bite the closest thing to it. If your dog is a resource guarder and you were reaching and it bit your hand, that is incredibly different than it bypassing your arm and going for your face or going for your neck or just jumping up because maybe it is somewhat of a smaller dog and biting in the stomach or the chest. There's huge differences to that kind of stuff. And one is intent to harm and do massive harm, which is bypassing the closest thing to you, to it, and then going after you. And then one, like biting the hand, is just a warning bite or a consequence of, hey, you shouldn't have reached for my food. This is what happens when you do that. That's completely different than actually trying to do harm.
I agree with everything you said there. So I want to make one clarification, and you said this, but I think it's worth just expanding. If someone says the dog bit this person in the face, like, sometimes people will say a face bite or a neck bite is different. And I mean, like, as far as the dog's behavior goes, and it's only different if the dog bypassed something else to get there,
Yeah,
which
that's a
Nelson
super good
said,
point.
but we just need to clarify that. So if you said it bit someone in the face, well, my question would be, what happened? And was the face the closest thing? If they're a resource guarder and you put your face by their bone and they bit you in the face, they would have bit your shoe, they would have bit your elbow, they would have bit whatever happened to be closest. As opposed to they jumped up to bite your face, obviously, is a lot different.
And think about kids, right? Because when I explain that to a lot of people, it's easy for people to hone in on the fact that it was the face. Like, well, when is your face ever the closest thing to the dog or whatever? Kids are their face is almost always closer to the dog because someone wasn't watching. Either wasn't watching the dog or wasn't watching the kids. But man, a lot of people who grew up in the 90s probably have some time that they got bit by some cocker spaniel, right? And have the little mark by the eye, either above or under. And a lot of it is from hugging. They went up, they hugged the dog, and the dog just turned around and bit the first thing that they could land teeth on. And it happened to be the face. But that's, again, completely different than you trying to keep the dog away and it going for your face after that.
So true. So one question I would ask of you, and I don't mean you, Nelson, I mean listeners, if you're thinking about euthanizing your dog, what would happen if your front door is left open and the dog gets loose? So do you have a dog that is going to search out someone and attack them? And if so, do you have a big dog that would do that? That's a much bigger problem than if you say, no, not a chance. My dog would be hiding in the bushes, and the only way he'd bite someone is if they reach for him. Different story, right? Could someone get hurt by that dog in the bushes? Sure. Yeah, of course they could. Is it likely? Probably not. And it's going to be a different bite. Fear biters very rarely continue to maul. I mean, and I say rarely because anything could happen, but usually fear biters are like, bam, 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 1, 2, 3 bites, and then they're like stepping back versus a dog that's, hunting for somebody. So think about that. If you open the door, your dog gets loose, what does it do? Does it search for someone and bite them? Or is it hiding in the bushes? And odds are your dog is somewhere in between those two things. But this is something you should be thinking about. This is kind of our jumping off point to start thinking about, what do you do with this dog?
Yeah, I think the implication there too, because I mean that's a super important question, right? And like you said, it's one of the first ones. It's right after does your dog bite people in the face? But the implication there is that things are going to go wrong, right? Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. I've never met anybody who's been perfect at absolutely everything. I've met a lot of people that had a close call and nothing happened, and that's fantastic. But if you're going to live with with this aggressive dog and it's not living like an inmate, right, where they're constantly in a crate or being moved around, that kind of stuff, accidents are absolutely going to happen. You had to reach back for some money for the pizza, or like somebody was watching your dog and that's how it happened. These things absolutely happen, and that's why the answer to the question is so important, right? Because we have to go into this expecting that this will happen one day.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Nelson, because I always explain to people someone's going to leave the door open.
Yep.
Lifelong, and this goes to even non aggression issues, the dog who doesn't know off leash come or whatever. Someone's going to leave the door open or gate open at some point in time in this dog's life, and what happens in that moment, that's key. So, there's an idea out there that there's no such thing as a bad dog. And like, it's a cute statement, and I like the idea. It gets people thinking about most dogs are not bad dogs. Even dogs that are doing bad stuff are not bad dogs. There are some bad dogs out there, and you could define this in many different ways. But there are some that have a screw loose or are just tougher and meaner and are willing to bite when they're unhappy. So the idea that there's no such thing as a bad dog, I completely disagree with. There are some dogs out there that are not kind of fit to live in a human world, and they're few and far between. They're not, I don't run into those dogs daily. I don't run into them monthly. I run into them pretty darn rarely. Most aggressive dogs were able to kind of, I'll make quotes here, fix, because I always tell people there's no fixing a dog. There's managing and getting them better and changing their behavior, but don't think of it like a robot.
Right.
You don't just fix it. But there are some dogs out there that are dangerous, whether it's because of breeding, who knows, right? Or, the way they were raised. There are some times where there's a bad dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird. It's weird to think that dogs are the only animal on the earth that never has a bad animal, right? And that it's always the owner. Yeah, humans suck at a lot of things, and breeding is one of them, right? I mean, it is what it is. Some dogs are born with genetic dispositions to certain diseases, and a lot of them are born with genetic dispositions to aggression, certain types of aggressions or behavior patterns, that kind of stuff. So that one has always been a super weird one to me, at least scientifically. But there is again, there is a huge difference between an under-socialized dog that we can start socializing, from a safe distance and coming closer, that kind of stuff, and just getting dogs, probably more nervous dogs, to learn a different behavior pattern. But there's a completely different, set of dogs out there that just, no matter how much exposure they're getting, they'll always plateau. And I don't know if you've met any, Matt, but there haven't been a lot of dogs that don't change their behavior. Every dog learns how to manage themselves to some degree. It's just that there's a point that they can't get over, and that's that dangerous point that we're talking. Like, okay, well, maybe there's other options we need to start exploring.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into our next category. So the first one was kind of like, how dangerous is the dog? What bites? What has it done in the past? But now we could move to, what have you done so far? Yeah. So what training has been done? What has been done to fix this problem? Because we get a lot of people that come to us with a dog they've decided they think needs euthanized. And sometimes a lot has been done. Sometimes I look and like next to nothing has been done. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a really big thing you need to be thinking about with your dog. What have you done so far? So specifically, have you worked with a trainer? If you have, how good is that trainer at managing aggression? Every trainer is different. I'm the first to admit, if you need an agility trainer that is going to get you to win an agility competition, you should not pay me anything, because I don't do competition agility. It's not my thing. If you went to a trainer like that to solve your dog's aggression issues and you didn't solve them, I wouldn't say I've tried everything, right? You need to go to a trainer who deals a lot in aggression. And this isn't a plug for Suburban Canine. I could care care less who you go to. Go to someone who knows how to handle aggression, whoever that may be. So have you done that? If so, have you followed their advice? And I'll say that again. Have you followed their advice? What did they tell you? And you need to be thinking, search your soul right now. Have you followed their advice? If they said you need to get out and socialize and they need to meet 30 people a week, have they met 30 people this week and last week and the week before? If you're not following their advice, then, I think it might be a little early to say the dog's not fixable or not trainable.
And I'll help you answer that question. Have you adjusted your lifestyle at all? Because if you didn't, you're not following the advice. I can guarantee you, right? At least from anyone who knows how to deal with aggressive dogs. Anytime you add a dog into your life, you have to adjust your lifestyle. You leave the parties a little earlier, that kind of stuff that they need to be watched. But that's also a very important.
All right, so we just had a split second of technical difficulties, and I think Nelson had just been kind of finishing up the idea that, asking if you've changed your lifestyle with, with the dog. And when I'm doing a consultation with someone or meeting with someone who's thinking about euthanizing your dog, so if I was talking to you right now, I always explain, and if you're listening to this podcast, I want you to think about this. I never try to hurt someone's feelings, but I don't really care if I do when I'm asking these questions. So what I was saying a minute ago about have you followed your trainer's advice, I'm not going to let someone get away with telling me like, yeah, I have. I'm going to ask more questions. And I don't care if it sounds a little bit pushy. And if you've done it all, great. That's awesome to hear. But if you haven't, that's even awesomer to hear. Because if you haven't, that means there's still hope. So when I'm asking these questions, I want to know, and my job is not to leave this consultation you saying, wow, Matt was like super fun to talk to the whole time. He never asked me hard questions. I felt comfortable every time, every second. That's not the goal. The goal is to make sure that if your dog is a danger and might kill somebody, that we address it. And if your dog is not, and if your dog can be saved, that we save your dog. That's what we're talking about here. So as you hear Nelson and I talk and some of the things we say, if you're like, oh, that sounds a little harsh, who cares? This is meant to be about figuring out, have you done everything? And if you haven't, I'm not angry. Like I said, I'm like, oh, good. Okay, I found some things we can work on here. So when I'm asking these hard questions, I'm looking for some things that I can hold out some hope and say, wow, you haven't done this. I've got some stuff for you. So that's what we're looking for here. So what's been done, right? Did you follow the advice? Have you changed your lifestyle? Very often the answer is no. And if you haven't done enough training, this is the part that really can really suck. Can you afford training? Do you have someone out there that you trust that's close enough that you can afford? And enough training that it's going to be relevant.
To make a difference.
Right. Like everyone sees these, TikTok dog trainers like, we did one lesson and the dog's good. You need so much after that, right? So can you afford that, right? And sometimes the answer is no, and that's really heartbreaking. But it's something to think about for real. Like, do you have the budget to be able to go down that road? I would always tell people, even if you don't have much, doing one lesson to at least get a trainer's opinion is an absolute no-brainer. Unless you just can't feed your family, unless it's like, give my kids dinner tonight or do a consult with a trainer. Like, obviously feed your kids dinner instead of the consult with the trainer. But if you can afford that, I would absolutely do it. If anything, just for your own peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And the affording part is such a tough one because there's so much time and exposure and experience that needs to go into the training to fix, a lot of the different aggressions. And a lot of it is so repetitive, so it's really, really tough to have a trainer do everything for you or at least, hold your hand through it all, because there's going to be a lot of different house calls that are going to look exactly the same. You're going to be achieving the exact same stuff because that's what's needed. But those are also, the good part is that those are also things that if you are working on a budget that you can be doing, so long as you're achieving the exact same thing. You don't necessarily need a trainer there. And so I mean, there are some things that you can do to help yourself in a budget type of way of, hey, we can only do so many house calls. But it's not just can you afford it financially, but can you afford to spend time, on it. That's a big factor, because time that you're training your dog is also time that you're not working, or not with your family. So
Yeah.
there's a price to that as well. And yeah, it's a very, very tough one, because I want everybody to be able to afford that kind of stuff and save as many dogs as possible. But you also have to be very real with yourself. And are you just postponing the inevitable and spending a ton of money on top of it, or are you not going to be able to achieve the results that are going to make your dog actually safe?
And it's hard because, you get people that say, like, trainers should do more, for free to help people that, that can't afford to train their dog. But then trainers wouldn't make a living because there's enough aggressive dogs out there. I could be busy 7 days a week, all day, every day, training aggressive dogs for free for people that can't afford it. Like, where do you draw the line? And so that's what's really hard. And there's not a good answer. When someone says we can't afford any training, that's a tough place to be when you have a dog with aggression issues. So I would say let's move to our next category for now. So, so far we've talked about what's the risk from the dog, right? What kind of bites has he had and what happens if he gets loose? Now we've talked about what's been done training wise. I think the third one we want to talk about is, what is the household like? And Nelson just talked a little bit about this of, like, do you even have time to train? Assuming you have money and you haven't done, we've identified 50 things that need done and you can afford training. Do you have the time to do it? But also, what's the household like? What is the risk profile of the household with this dog? So an example would be, if your dog guards resources and you have triplets that are 18 months in the house and your dog is large, that risk profile is obscenely high. And I'm extremely worried when I hear that. On the flip side of that, if you say, hey, it's just me and my spouse, we're 40, don't have kids, never plan to, dog guards resources, but it's only as rawhide, it's predictable and generally, and we know when it's coming and we know the warning signs, it's a heck of a lot different.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that difference is who's getting bit and how bad do I feel for them, as rude as that is, right? But like, I'm going to feel a lot worse when a kid gets bit, and especially because things can happen there as well. You answer the phone, you weren't watching the kid, that kind of stuff. Then adults who it's their dog, and therefore, like, they take the consequences of a resource guarding dog. But that's also, there's a difference, like we were talking about with risk, right? There's a difference to size of dog and how bad the bites actually are. So
Yeah. And it gets messy in a hurry when you're talking about what's an appropriate risk and what's not an appropriate risk, right? And it depends on the level of the bite, who it's to, how old they are. A 12-year-old versus a 1-year-old to me is very different. A 20-year-old and a 12-year-old is very different. So that matters for sure. And often when I talk to clients, I meet a new client with a dog with some severe aggression issues, and they say, is he fixable? What I'll tell them, and sometimes, is I'll look at the household and I'll say, is this dog fixable? Yes, I think, I'll never say 100%, but like 98% yes. These issues you've described to me, we can quote unquote fix. We can manage them until they basically go away. But can it happen in your household? I don't know. And should it happen in your household? I don't know. And I'll give you a couple examples. One is those 3 toddlers. The training's a journey. So you have a dog with a ton of aggression issues that might happen to people. And some dogs would never bite anyone in the home. And then they could be in the house with the kids while you're fixing those other problems. So we need to address that. If your dog is aggressive with new people but is great with your kids, there's a chance it's going to be fine with them forever. And it's just the other issues you have to worry about. But if your dog is resource guarding or whatever, is unpredictable and might show aggression to kids, it's a journey. So if we say, okay, 6 months from now, I think everything's going to be completely different. Well, how do you get through the next 6 months without one of your kids getting severely injured? And so there are times where I tell people that's not worth the risk. As a parent, as a parent, I do not think you should do this. I don't think you should keep this dog in your house. As a dog trainer, like, I want to work with you and fix this dog, but as a parent, I don't want to do that with these young children in the house when we know the dog is a risk to them until we fix it. So that's a challenge. You have to think about your own household. What's the risk profile, and can you keep the dog safely until the issues are much, much better?
For sure. Yeah. And there's a lot that goes into that. A lot of the times I guess I always have to tell people, the first house call will tell me if I can work with your dog and get good results. But the next 5 lessons are going to tell me if you can work with the dog and get good results. And that's not going to happen in one lesson. And there's obviously, you're half of the team. So I need to know a little bit more about you as well. But the other thing too is just, what are the issues that the dogs have? If they are very aggressive towards anyone outside of the house, but also have an extreme amount of separation anxiety, and you can't put them up in a room while you have people fixing the house or working, or people come over, that kind of stuff. That's way different than if you do have a very aggressive dog but likes to sleep on your bed and isn't really going to have a problem if you have a party downstairs and never really wants to break out of the room, because that aggression it's a part of the personality. It's not their personality, right? And so like that certainly factors in how rambunctious and crazy it is. Obviously, even if it's not a danger to your kid specifically because it's resource guarding or wants to bite or anything like that, but it's so freaking manic that when someone comes over, it runs around the house bulldozing people, biting anything that it absolutely can. I mean, now again, we're talking about risking kids, because the dog is not going to run around and like, ooh, I better stay away from the kids while I'm trying to attack this guy. It's just going to plow the kids over to get to the guy that it wanted, guy, girl, whatever it is. So there's other aspects to that question. It's not just who lives there, but also what are the circumstances surrounding the dog, and then surrounding the situations where the dog is likely to show this aggression.
Yeah. Yeah, and what is the household like, right? And sometimes we have people that don't have clients that don't have many guests come over, and everything is pretty controlled. Then we have others who have teenagers, and they're like, we're the fun house. Like, this is where, people come over, and, my son, daughter, whoever brings friends over, there's always someone new. And they just rescued a dog, and they've had it for 6 months, and it's bit 5 people already because people come in at all hours. And that's a lot harder, because I'm going to ask them, like, how are you going to manage this? I'll give you exercises to work on, but your dog's bit 5 people in the last few months, and they keep coming in when you're not watching the dog, and the dog is free. That has to change. How's it going to change? You're either going to need to use a crate or lock your door and people knock before they come in. Something has to give. Otherwise, this is going to continue forever. And I'll tell a client when I think they're being unreasonable here, and I'll try to say it in a nice way. If they're like, yeah, I think I should euthanize the dog because he's bit 5 people, I hear what's happened, and it's just kids bring home a friend at 10 p.m. They walk in, dog has fear issues and has nipped, 5 people in the butt. I would tell them, I think you're being very cavalier in your decision here, and that's not fair to the animal. That dog should not be euthanized. He hasn't been set up for success, and sounds like he's fearful, and he's bit 5 people in the butt because he keeps being put in a situation where he's going to fail and nothing's been done. It'd be a lot different than if you said, I just got this dog, he's been in the house a few months, and everything was good, and then one day my daughter brought her boyfriend over, and the dog attacked him, grabbed his arm, and was shaking his arm and would not let go, and it took 2 of us to pry him off. That's a different story. So
and I think it's worth exploring, even through the steps that we had already taken, that exact situation. I think that's a really good one, because it's one that we see, all the time, the biting in the butt as soon as the person turns around because the dog is fearful. We see that all the time. And a lot of it is, what is the house like? And you have teenagers that are bringing friends over, and listen, man, I'm with you. I would like my house to be that house too. I'd rather my kids stay home and bring friends over. But that's a factor, absolutely. And then, have you done the training? Can you afford to do the training? Have you done the training? Have you set up that situation not in the middle of the night so that you can see if does daylight affect, that kind of stuff, and then actually worked on how to introduce, your dog to other people, and what are the kind of fear scenarios, that kind of stuff. And then also, what is the severity of the bites, right? I mean, it sucks to get bit in the ass, I'm with you, or in the butt rather, but that's way different than the dog you were just describing, right? Which is actually trying to pull you down to bite you again. There's a completely different, and I think it's worth working through all the scenarios so that we can say yes or no and see what's the proper outcome. Because a fear biting dog that doesn't go for the jugular and just nips what it can and runs away, and it's never a severe thing, it's really, really tough to justify euthanizing that dog when maybe you're not the house for it. That's fair, but you probably didn't need to euthanize it. You probably could have just found someone that's a better fit.
Well, that is a perfect segue into our next category, which is what are your other options? Can you rehome this dog or can you put them into a shelter?
I'm full of these segues, man.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue. And I mean, Nelson just hit a big one. Sometimes you're just not the right house for the dog. And sometimes, and when we say sometimes, it's not like, I've heard of a situation where this happened. I mean, we've seen this many times that you put the dog in a new household and problems go away. But I don't sell, spin fairy tales for people. It's if you have a fearful dog that's not been given any structure and is not being socialized and nothing's been done, yeah, that dog going to a new house could probably turn a 180.
Oh, yeah.
A dog that unprovoked is attacking people, less comfortable. And I'm not saying no, that it couldn't be fixed, but I'm not saying like that's a slam dunk. I see some where I say that's a slam dunk. We rehome this dog to the right house, problems are going to be basically solved. Mm-hmm. And there's times where it's not. That's so much of a slam dunk. And then people ask about rescues. Some dogs do really well in rescues and some do not. And you need to really think about if you give this dog to a rescue, who's going to take it and what's going to happen? Are they going to be able to manage the dog safely?
Yeah, is the rescue even going to take it? That's another one, because if your dog has 5 bites and they're pretty serious bites, and we know that the dog is not just necessarily fearful, put in wrong situations, but actually actively seeking out people to bite, there's a lot of rescues that aren't going to be able to help you. And that's just them being smart. That's not them using their heart. That's them using their brain of, listen, man, we're not going to be able to actually manage the situation and vet out the people. And there's 6 other dogs that maybe were just put in the wrong situation, and like those dogs, they deserve to be saved too. And this is going to sound rude, but they deserve to be saved more than this dog.
Well, that's a whole nother episode right there.
For sure. Yeah, you're not wrong.
So, and when we're talking about going to a rescue, just need to think through every dog is going to act different and react differently to a rescue to like a shelter in that environment. So I'll give you 2 extreme examples. And, one would be you have an English Mastiff who, is 2 years old and a kid went to hug him and he, bit him in the face, and just like a kind of a fear bite, bit him, maybe drew blood, and you realize you have kids in the house, so someone else might hug him, can't live with you, you don't want to take the risk, which I understand. That dog will probably do well in a shelter. He'll probably find an adult-only home, and he'll probably thrive, and everything will be great. If you have a Malinois, who, and not to pick on males here, but just picture like an intense, drivey, busy dog who has bit 5 people because of distrust, but is willing to lash out and go after them to do it. You put that dog in a shelter, and the dog's going to go crazy. If he's not crazy already, he's going to go crazy in a hurry. He's going to be spinning in that run, barking, freaking out. People are going to try to pull him out to walk him. He's going to bite someone at the shelter, and he's just going to spend a few months there until he goes downhill enough that the shelter's like, all right, we've got to euthanize this dog now. So
because you do have to, sorry to cut you off, but I mean, you do have to put that into perspective of if the dog is spinning and crazy, the way that volunteers, because most of them are volunteers, not paid workers, the way that the volunteers are going to start treating that dog, and this is inevitable, this is not them being rude, is going to change. They're going to use a lot more precaution, take a lot more of the personal hand-holding emotional stuff out of the situation because they have to do this more safely. And that's going to affect the dog too. It's not crazy that it's going to get worse and worse there just because it's not meeting its, energy requirements, that kind of stuff, and then it's in a shifty place. Shifty, I mean, there's no consistency there. And then on top of that, now people are treating it differently. I mean, all of those factors are going to affect such a high drive kind of dog, because it doesn't have to be a male. It could be a border collie. It could be
Sure.
any Australian Shepherd, whatever. It's just any kind of working dog is going to have a much harder time doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they all change when they're in there. And, I'll give you a quick story. Just a few months ago, I went to a shelter. They had asked for help with some aggression cases they had. And two of the cases they were worried about were both pit mixes. And so I worked with both of them for maybe an hour and a half each. And they both were described to me, the issues were roughly the same. When people get them out of the run, they bite them. Sometimes they're good, they get worked up, and then they bite. And people are scared of them and don't want to work with them, and we can't adopt them out. Worked with both dogs for an hour and a half. The results were, this dog is fine. He's a nice dog. No one has ever given him any structure. That dog has since been, they fixed those problems. They gave him a training plan. The dog's adopted out. The other dog was the opposite. You could see it in its eyes. The dog had intention to do harm. And we had conversations about, could this be fixed? Yes. Can it be fixed in your shelter? Probably not. And they made the tough decision to euthanize, but they've probably saved 9 more dogs during that time frame by that dog not being in there. And my point is, though, these dogs presented with the same description. Same breed, roughly same age, same place, same behaviors, and they were completely and utterly different. And that's why it's really important to get an expert's eyes on the dogs to figure out, which one do you have? Do you have the kind that's misunderstood, or do you have the kind that's maybe misunderstood? You don't even quite realize how bad it is yet until something happens.
Yeah, no, that's a super, super good point, because there's just drastically different outcomes when it comes to a lot of these dogs. And listen, if it's your dog, you're going to be pulling for it, even if you're scared of it, and that we're having this conversation. You might not always be as honest with yourself as you need to be. And, an expert will help you there.
100%. So here's what I think we should do, Nelson. I want to do a quick summary of what we've talked about, just for someone listening. I want you to think about all these things with your own dog. Then maybe we'll go into some more kind of real stories or some more examples. What do you think about that?
Let's go for it.
Okay, so first, how big is your dog? Are we talking a little dog or a big dog? What's the risk profile, right?
Hey, before you move on to that one,
yes,
throw out a general guideline. 30 pounds. How you feel? 30-pound pit.
30 pounds or less, I'm not very worried. And when I say I'm not cavalier, like, oh, let them bite someone, that's cool. But, 30 pounds or less, like, the odds of them killing someone are effectively zero. And then, 30 to 50, depends on the breed.
For sure.
Are they a muscly 50? That's pretty big at that point. So
yeah,
over
absolutely.
30 is when I'd get a lot more worried. And then what is the risk profile? If your dog gets loose, what does he do? Does he run down the street looking for someone to attack, or does he hide in the bushes? And obviously those are extreme. Your dog's probably somewhere between them. But what have his bites been up until now? Did he bite someone who tried to pet him, or did he go out of his way to attack a guest? And if he attacked the guest, did he jump and nip their butt when they walked out of the room? Or did they go to give you a hug and he jumped up, grabbed their arm, and wouldn't let go? Really different things.
And did he bite twice? We
Yes.
didn't talk about that, but
So-
that's certainly a thing.
I mean, let's talk there, because there's multiple ways you bite twice, and one worries me and one doesn't. So
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so if let's take a German Shepherd, right? Because they're snappy, is I guess probably the better word to use there.
yeah,
If a German Shepherd runs up and bites you twice, or even 5 times, I'll go crazy, right? 5 times in the span of 10 seconds. That is not the same as what I was imagining, right? So I'm glad you stopped me. That's where, did the dog run up and bite you, and then you were able to get him away, and then the second you thought the situation was cool, he ran right back to go after the same person. And one is a matter of I don't want to say personality, but one's just a matter of behavior, right? They're snappy, and therefore they got 5 bites in the time that a normal dog would have gotten 1. The other is intention. I intend to hurt that person. I intend to, as soon as you let me go, I'm going right back at him. right?
Yeah,
Because the intention was to cause harm.
absolutely. So I think that's a great point to make. And German shepherds, if they have 5 seconds, they'll bite you 5 times,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
that's different than picture you like Nelson said, you pull the dog away, everything seems calm, and the dog's like, "Let me at him," and charges again to attack. No
Hmm.
longer is it just the adrenaline or surprise or whatever; it's the desire to attack there.
Exactly.
And very few of these things are deal breakers, just so you know. Like that's why I wanted to run through all of these things again, because you're adding up all of this, right? And you're thinking about all of these different things. So now, what's been done to fix the problem? How many trainers have you seen? Do those trainers have experience in aggression? Have you followed their advice? Have you modified your lifestyle? If you haven't done training, can you afford the right level of training? Do you have time to train the dog? And then we get to household. Is it a danger to your family members? And are you able to live safely with this dog during the training process? And just make up a number of 6 months. Let's say you meet a great trainer and they're like, "We know you, we can do it. It'll take roughly 6 months. Can you live safely during that time frame?" If you're thinking about rehoming, who's going to take the dog? How are they going to succeed where you can't? And sometimes it's obvious they don't have kids in the house or they have time or whatever, but sometimes it's just the same thing in a new environment. So
Yeah.
is the dog going to do well in a shelter? Do you have or do you have somewhere good it can go? So those are the things we think about, and we use all of that to kind of calculate an overall risk, like odds of success and risk during that time frame. That's what we're thinking about here. So that's big picture, kind of everything. Nelson, I talked a lot there. What's running through your mind after hearing all of that? Clarifications you want to make or examples you want to give?
The hard one, is who's going to take the dog. That's one that I really caution a lot of people on. And the reason I caution them is because I never want to deceive who the next person is going to be. And we get that a lot. We get that when I'm having these conversations of rehoming the dog and someone wants to try it on Facebook or someone wants to, like, I always urge everybody, be incredibly truthful and honest with what is going on with the dog. Be honest and tell them why you can't fix it, because hopefully the next person takes that into account. The reason I care is because there's also a lot of people out there. I'm going to be rude and call them foolish, but there's a lot of people out there that think with their heart and not with their brain, and they're going to take the dog because otherwise it could spell out euthanasia. And that person's not going to have any success or change with this dog because they might have the exact same personality or the exact same circumstance as you. Maybe they even have a more soft personality than you do, and that's why you were able to kind of pawn the dog off on them. But be be cautious with who the next owner is going to be, and if you're in the situation and you're thinking of taking a dog that has behavioral issues, be cautious about who you are and who that dog is, and can you actually make a difference. Because if you're just if you're just holding out and the dog is going to get euthanized anyways, we're really just risking people at that point. Or are you different than the original owner? Maybe you are more disciplined. Maybe you know how to run a structured household. Maybe you don't have the same circumstances. You don't have any kids, and therefore no kids are going to be around. And like we were talking about with that mastiff, I mean, that happens a lot because kids move really fast and they don't make good decisions, and it's easy to get a dog in a situation it wasn't prepared for. Do you have time to prepare those kinds of situations? There's a lot of different questions. We could have probably done a podcast on each individual one of these, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's so important to get a professional out there to help you run through what your options actually are.
Yep, all good points. I'll give you two examples of things to think about real quick. These are real examples. One is years ago, I worked with an American Bulldog, big Johnson type American Bulldog. He was fairly young, and the owners came to me and there were aggression issues and they were debating putting down the puppy. And there were real issues there. And so I ended up saying, I was looking for an American Bulldog at that point in time. And I was like, don't put him down. If you don't want the dog, I will keep him. And I took the dog, raised him for like, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, and kept in contact with the people. They saw him later on, and the dog was trouble. He tried to bite my wife the first day in the house, and it was discipline related. It was like if you grabbed his collar, he was like, "No way, you don't mess with me." And we trained that out of him. And they ended up months later, were like, "Hey, is there any way we could have the dog back?" And in good conscience, I couldn't keep him, so gave him the dog back. And he grew to be a monster-sized dog, like 140 pounds, and he was great. And they had him life. He lived a long life, and he was fine. And so that's a cool success story. And that was a dog who did not need put down. And his aggression was based upon he hadn't learned impulse control, and he hadn't learned he wasn't the big man on campus, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But I can give you another example. Was helping a humane society with a lab pit mix that didn't give me trouble. I trained him, and like there were issues, but nothing major. But if he saw weakness, he was willing to act upon it. And he, ended up at the shelter trying to attacking somebody, that was just out walking them. And I happened to be there and ran out and broke it up, but had to separate and get the dog away from the person. And to me, it was very clear if no one had been there, this dog would have continued attacking that person. And to me, that is a dog that it just can't live safely in this world. Left to his own devices, I don't know what would have happened to that woman, but it wouldn't have been good. So very, very different things. One was a dog who would snap and bite to say, "Leave me alone, don't mess with me." And the other was what Nelson said. Like when I got this dog and I had to slip lead it, like kind of lasso it, slip lead it, pull it away, it was still fighting to get away from me to attack that person. Mm-hmm. Whole different story. So if I hadn't been there, and it was just dumb luck, but if I hadn't, someone would have been in the hospital for sure. So you need to think through. That goes back to example, kind of like what's the risk profile? That's number 1 or 2 on our list. What would your dog do, left to their own devices? Do they just snap and bite, or do they maul?
And I really want to point out in those examples, because those are really good ones. Age plays a role. With the big American Bulldog, I don't remember his name, but I remember you telling me about him. He was a younger dog. He was a jerk for sure, right? But that's a dog that you were able to work with because of how old it was. But imagine if that dog was 3, and had 3 years of experience of doing the exact same thing. It would have been a completely different dog. 140 pounds of pure I don't want to say rage, but I mean he was bulldogs, right? Bulldogs are they're a different level, and that's not to say that he's not awesome now, but that's probably because you got your hands on him when he was he was under 1. How old was he? Do you remember?
No, he was young.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So he was still and so people might hear that and say, "Oh, it's a puppy, not real aggression." And no, this was real aggression for sure. Yeah. But the reason, and to what Nelson's point here, I would not have brought that dog in my house at 140 pounds if he had those issues, right? Because if I'm not home, could potentially kill a family member, right? So I was only willing to do it in the house because he was small. So yeah, age mattered there for sure. And also with our calculus of risk. Yep. The risk was, my wife or I get bit, and it would hurt and it'd be kind of scary and wouldn't be fun, but it's not like lose a hand.
Right.
Or die. So, those things matter for sure.
So, I guess the big point that I'll throw out there is that, sometimes it's really, really tough because at a younger age, at 1, maybe 1.5, certain dogs can absolutely be trained and fixed and, all of that stuff. And we're still at a decent point here, all the math is still in his favor. But give it another 1.5 years, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. We're talking about a lot of experience that we're going to have to unpack there. And if, maybe the danger level doesn't match the experience level, and now all of a sudden the outcome is different. It could have been a 50-pound pit that's a year, and just, can it be dangerous? Absolutely. Can you see aggression? Absolutely. But it's also young enough that you could probably show it, some good structure and actually make a difference there. Or is it 5 years old, same 50 pounds, but now it's been let to, do whatever it does, whatever it wants, run roughshod, and the more people that you have over, it's got 10 bites, because of how much time it is. And all of those bites matter. All those bites tell that dog, like, hey, man, this is the right option because it's awesome. It works. It works out well. And that changes the equation. All of a sudden we're talking about, unfortunately, a better candidate to be put down than to be, worked with safely.
Yeah, you have to take so much into account. So, kind of running through our list here, if you have a dog who, if you say he got loose, he would for sure attack someone unprovoked. He is large. I've seen trainers, they're experienced in aggression. I've worked really, really hard. He's gotten a little bit better, but I still know he would attack somebody. I'm worried about him with my family members. We've got people in and out. The door's left open a lot. I know he won't do well in a shelter. That dog, from everything I've just heard, should probably be euthanized. And if you don't, someone's going to get mauled. And that is, that's on you at that point, right? For making that decision to allow that to happen. On the flip side, I used to have a dog who bit 4 people on the butt. I went to training classes, didn't get any better. I'm not sure what to do. He's been fine with our kids. It's just when people come over, I think euthanizing that dog sounds kind of crazy, or actually really crazy, because we're talking about the type of attack and bite is not unprovoked mauling. It's, nips in the butt. You haven't worked with a trainer who's experienced in aggression at this point. There's not a big danger to the family. Someone else could probably take that dog and do incredibly well with it, and the issue would just go away. So you need to kind of plug your dog into these categories and think about it like that.
Man, I'm glad you actually brought that one up because that's such a good one where a lot of people, and I know you harped on it beforehand, but it's always worth hitting again. Training is not training, which is not training, which is not training, right? I mean, there's so many different behaviors that people are trying to get dogs to do that we've all split up into our own different things, right? We are, Suburban Canine, me and you, Matt, we're not service dog trainers, and we're also not protection dog trainers, and we're also not sport dog trainers, right? We train dogs to be good family members, and we work on behavioral issues, and those are not the same all the way across. So when you ask yourself, I guess rather, did I do training with my dog? We're not talking about Petco classes. We're not even talking about classes, from the city or anything like that. I mean, we're talking about, did I get a trainer over to specifically talk about these issues and come up with a game plan as to how to fix these specific issues? Because, I don't want you to hear, did I get training from my dog, and think, yes, when he was 6 months old, which was 2 years ago, I did, a training session at the park district. It's not the same.
Absolutely. So what I would say is if you're going through this right now, talk to a trainer for sure. If you want to drop a comment on the video and tell us what's going on with your dog and ask for an opinion, we will give you one. But know that there's gonna be a caveat to every one of, we don't know the dog and we're not seeing him. So based upon what we're seeing, here's what we think. And that's, when you don't see the dog and you don't know the dog, it's always just an educated guess based upon what I'm hearing. So if you ask us questions, on the comment section of this, expect we're going to ask questions back, of I need more details, and I'll tell you exactly what I need to know, and we'll give you the best advice we can like that.
And I actually will plug the company, right? I mean, we also do virtual consults, right? Virtual house calls. So I think that would be a really good, because let me tell you, it's not crazy that we do a house call and we spend half an hour talking about a dog this aggressive. There's so many questions and avenues that we need to know about. They all factor in. So, comments are awesome, but there's a limiting factor there, of course. If you're looking for a better opinion, better educated opinion, I think a virtual house call would probably be better. And I'm sure we're not the only ones that offer that kind of stuff. I'm going to be a huge jerk and say, don't go to a behaviorist. But aside from that, right, like get a virtual opinion from somebody.
I'm just laughing about your last comment. Put the dog on these 9 medicines and we'll see if it fixes it.
But, it's going to be $500 just to see me on your computer screen.
So that was tongue in cheek. That was for some of these behaviorists that will charge you $500 or $1,000 to then tell you, go find a trainer and start these 3 medications.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks for watching. If you're going through this with your dog, sorry to hear that. I know this is not an easy thing to think about or talk about, but reach out and we'll give you whatever help we can.
All right. I'll see you, everybody.
Take care.